Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror. I am your host, Kevin Powers. I'm also the owner and operator of Something Wicked, Something Wicked Entertainment and Events. And welcome to our podcast. I am so happy for us to be joining you again for the year 2005. We're trying to delve deep into the horror genre and a lot of the classic films and almost classic films out there, which is one of the films we're going to be discussing today. But if you are someone who has been following our podcast, I want you to know that this year we have a mandate to tackle as many different genres, as many different decades in the horror community as we can. So with that, we are actually delving into a semi remake, so to speak, from Dark Castle, early Dark Castle Entertainment.
You want to talk about remakes, man. This one, there's 4 different versions of this.
So we're discussing, and that was Sarah Panazzo, my special guest today.
Hello.
And we are tackling the in name really only of the movie House of Wax. But when Dark Castle was coming up with all of their remakes for I think it was Warner Brothers. Was it Warner Brothers? I think it was Warner Brothers.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember it either. I think it was Warner Brothers though. When they were coming back and doing these films, they were doing essentially remakes at first, I believe, of all their films. I think actual Ghost Ship may have been the first one that wasn't a remake, but I could be wrong now. Dark Castle has produced so much stuff now, but when they were first doing films, they were doing like the House on Haunted Hill remake, the 13 Ghosts remake, and it kind of kept snowballing from there. But if you're a fan of that, and this was the year 2005. So in
20 years ago, man.
20 years ago. So this is almost like an actual anniversary of us talking about House of Wax, because I haven't seen the movie since 2005. Before we decided to do the show. So it should be interesting to discuss this with Panazzo, who may or may not have seen it in 2005, or who knows. We're gonna ask her that right now. So Panazzo, let us all know your original impression of this film when you saw it. I don't know if you saw it when it came out or how it was.
So I can't remember if I saw it in theaters or if I rented it from the video store. I know it was very close to when it actually came out because I remember wanting to go to only see Paris Hilton die, because that was the time of like Simple Life and a bunch of the reality TV stuff. And every single girl wanted to be Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, and I was not one of those girls, but it was just one of those obnoxious things where they were everywhere at the time. And so the fact that she was in this movie, I know a bunch of the horror community was upset. I was excited to go see it because of Jared Padalecki, because I was a huge Supernatural fan at the time, and then Chad Michael Murray, because it's Chad Michael Murray. But I remember going to see it and thinking like, man, this movie is absolutely awful. I hate Paris Hilton. I hate some of this other stuff. And it just kind of like stayed at that. And I don't think I ever rewatched it until I did for this episode. And man, have my opinions changed.
You know what? I only saw it because I knew of it being a Dark Castle film. I don't think I knew of any of the actual actors in this film prior to seeing it, really. I think was it Elisa Cuthbert, whatever her
Yeah.
her name. I have never been able to say her name. Alicia Cuthbert. Her name right. I think I only knew her really from 24, and I can't remember when 24 came out, but I'm sure
that was much later than this. Yeah, because I don't even think I really knew her at the time. It was really just the two guys in Paris Hilton. I mean, I recognized the guy who played Blake because he was on Disney Channel at some point in one of their like original movies, so that's what I knew him from. But that was about it.
Well, I saw it at the theater. One, because I actually love the Dark Castle films. I saw pretty much almost all of them at the theater when they originally came out. And the other thing is that I was a huge horror nut back then. This is 20 years ago. So I kind of tried to see everything out there at the theater that was released, especially this one because it was a mainstream film. And of course, a House of Wax. When the hell had anyone done anything with a freaking wax museum in a horror film? It's been so freaking long. And I was a huge fan of Mystery of the Wax Museum and the other I can't remember what the was it Vincent Price one that was called.
House of Wax, yeah.
So that one was called House of Wax too. I remember Mystery of the House of Wax. I couldn't remember what the original one was called.
Yeah, so the book is The Waxworks by Charles Belden, and I believe he also worked on the 33 film Mystery of the Wax Museum, which it is based off of. 53 did the Vincent Price House of Wax, which is almost a replica of it, or it is similar enough. And then it completely jumps the shark, but contains the same horror elements in House of Wax in 2005.
Okay, so other than that, the only other movie that I can think of that has wax in it is the horrible Wax Mask, and of course, Waxwork.
Yes.
The 1 and 2, which well, 2 is less so. It's just a time jump in that one. But that's about all I know about wax museums. No one ever does a whole bunch of horror aspects of it. So of course I'm gonna jump to go see this one because it actually looked horrifying.
Well, and it is one of those things that nobody really does, and then it turned into like a whole YouTube channel where celebrities replace their wax characters, like some of the more famous ones. But like it goes back to like Twilight Zone with the mannequins coming to life. Like it's another aspect of that that's even creepier because like this, you still get people who may or may not still be alive inside, which adds a whole nother level of fear. But yeah, I mean, rewatching this, it was nowhere near as bad as I remember. The gore was fantastic, and it's very stereotypical for its time. Paris Hilton, I know everybody was freaking out, and they're like, she won a Razzie for being the best or worst supporting actress.
Gee,
But
really?
yeah, they lost worst film and lost worst picture to Dirty Love and lost worst remake to Son of the Mask. Um, but yeah, I was like, she's kind of stereotypical in the role in the as the actual character. Like she does a decent amount of acting compared to some of the other stuff we see, which is like absolute garbage that you don't go out of your way to watch after the first time. But like she's nowhere near as bad as I remember. I know that there was a whole thing with like her and the company actually did See Paris Die as a marketing campaign, and she started selling shirts that said it. So that got a lot of people into the theaters as well. Um, but I mean it still holds up pretty well. I mean, it's very stereotypical 2005. It feels like the 2000s. The soundtrack, the setting, everything they're doing, the flip phones. It's it's really a little throwback, which is really nice.
Well, I will agree with you on that. One of the things, it is, was it five friends who venture off into the no man's land. They take a detour, the most famous, they detour and they end up at a town that's completely, I get void of people except for two twin brothers who are using it as their own wax.
I
Uh,
mean, you can't forget the puppies in the window and the woman spying at them from behind the curtain. There are people there.
You know what? I've forgotten a lot about that until I rewatched it, and I started realizing this was a very clever movie because the entire
Yes.
town is more or less a huge wax figure. I
Well, and
forgot all that.
I did too because I didn't remember. I remember there being everybody in the House of Wax was an actual person who was waxed, but I didn't remember the rest of the town was. And then there's actually a small throwaway scene when they're outside the hunting store and they like break the glass to get the crossbow. There is a sign in there that says Trudy's Town of Wax. And I was like, I don't think I caught that the first time I saw it. And so, like, a lot of the little comments the brothers make to each other about, like, oh, mom would be so proud of you with all the work you've done makes a lot more sense. And actually, the studio did make all of that out of wax. That was an empty field, and they built the entire thing, laid out the power, and built everything from wax.
Yeah, I only noticed that sign too this time because I was paying attention. I hate to say this, in 2005 when I saw it in the theater, I wasn't paying that much attention. But when I was rewatching it, I was like, "Oh crap, I see that sign there," and I started to pick up on all this stuff. I was like, "Oh shit, I had forgotten so much about this movie." I was pleasantly surprised and entertained watching it. And now that I know all the actors, like I literally know all the actors.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was so funny because I was like, I recognize the tow truck driver. I don't even think he had a real name. They even just put tow truck driver on there. But I was like, I know his face, and then I realized he's Manson in like everything nowadays. And I was like, oh, that's why I know him. Okay, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So that being said, I wanted to touch upon some of the story aspects of it because it is a typical, it's almost typical. The thing that makes this one different is that two of the characters actually venture into town first. The other ones leave.
Yeah.
And they're not killed off immediately. I noticed that this film takes a while before anyone actually gets killed. And so the three leave, and then you follow the two characters as they venture into the town. And then the other three characters come back, but then four characters.
Four characters, yeah. It's
And,
three groups of two. Yeah, the two couples and then the two guys.
and then two characters venture off in the town, and then the other two still stay at the tent. I like that's an interesting way of writing the story because it doesn't seem so completely convoluted and all the characters are all together at once. That
Hmm.
I actually really thought was clever with the story because we're so used to the all six of them being trapped in the town at the exact same time. And yeah, it was like, yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that until I rewatched it. I was like, oh, that's a clever way of having six people, and they all do die pretty quickly, but you have the setup time before they all die. It's like it's quick succession, but we also have to watch Cuthbert get tortured a couple times before any of that happens.
Yeah, it was a little rough at times because like I didn't remember much of the gore aspect from when I watched it. I remember it being like gross, but like the gore in this is fantastic between like uh the main chick getting like brutalized, like getting strapped to the chair and taped down like the brother was when he was younger,
Uh-huh.
and then like snipping off the tip of her finger as she's trying to reach for help. Like I thought he was gonna like step on her finger, but I didn't think he was gonna pull pliers out and snip it off the tip. And then like the physics doesn't make any sense with it, but like scraping wax off of somebody's face and it just starts peeling and it just keeps going and everything else was just
Well, yeah, and he's still alive. That
it's
wax
and
was hot when he
it
went on it.
brings out a lot of like not talked about like grossness because
Uh-huh.
like you've got these people of how many of these people are still semi alive or how many of them didn't even die from their stuff but they starved to death being waxed and they're just sitting there and then like you see the different bodies getting cut up where like one person's still gooey inside, another person is like completely mummified and it's just dust inside and it's like this is really disgusting and like it's a lot of other repercussions that like a lot of people I don't think of because there's so many other things going around this that you're like it's not just wax people like their eyeballs start melting out at one point and it's just like this is
That's an impressive sequence at the end.
it really is and it was one of the things I found I was trying to look up if all of it was actually wax or not and it was wax and then I found out the VFX company is the same one who did Ghost Ship which makes a lot of sense because their opening scene is very similar to a lot of the violent cuts that happen in this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I will say that I was extremely still impressed with the final sequence in this film with the whole wax museum being melting. I did not remember that at all until I rewatched it. I don't know why I this film just fell off my radar. After I saw it in 2005, it kind of fell off the radar for me. Um, I didn't know any of the actors really, and so it didn't really. And Dark Castle was like putting out a new movie every year, and so this one just fell off the radar after I saw it. So revisiting it was actually a pleasure because I enjoyed it immensely now, and I can actually say or recommend the movie to people because I don't think any of the actors did a horrible job or a bad job in the film at all. I think,
No,
like you said, like Paris is playing a character and she does a really good job with it, and then of course she has a really violent death that I forgot until it happened. I was like, oh damn.
I made so many jokes about that, and I know everybody else did too.
Well, before I saw it again, we were talking about that, and I was like, I don't remember how she died.
Yeah, for some reason, I thought more of them ended up in in the actual house. And so when she died there, or when they were just like at the campsite or whatever, I was like, how did I forget all of this? Like, what was I doing? Um, but yeah, I mean, like, it was weird because I think when we saw this, it was a very bizarro time for horror in the mid 2000s of you had some really bad movies that everybody saw because a ton of people were in them. And then you had some really good movies, but they were all like cult films that have progressed since then. Because, like, the year that this came out, 2005, you get some older ones that aren't that great and didn't stand the test of time, like Cursed, Cry Wolf, The Fog remake, Gingerbread Man, Hide and Seek. But then you get like
Seek, I forgot about that.
Devil's Rejects, The Descent, 2001 Maniacs, Hostel, Saw 2, Ring 2. Everybody started having their things. Skeleton Key came out. So it's like everybody and their mother was making horror movies, but we were so like, they were all just like, meh. There wasn't anything that was huge except for the indie films that I think we've actually hit a lot of the indie films that were the best of these 3 years around 2005.
Huh.
Because, yeah, like you get like Shaun of the Dead, uh, the Dawn of the Dead remake, Club Dread, Hellboy, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, Severance, Silent Hill, Slither, Snakes on a Plane came out the year after, Hatchet, and then Nick Cage's Wicker Man. So you've got a lot of like those are like the ones that I was like consider good nowadays or like the most memorable. And there's so many lists of like sequels, like all of the Saw franchise, The Tooth Fairy, Ginger Snaps 2 and 3. So there was a very wide variety of these really unnecessary sequels or really like bad movies that just had a ton of celebrities in them.
Yeah.
And then we had these really sleeper hits that are now getting really popular.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. I to be honest with you, since I haven't really looked at the whole 2000s decade in terms of horror, I can't really picture the ones I thought were the best of that decade. We should probably do an episode on that.
Well, and that was the thing is like I was in like high school and like middle school during that time. So like I remember every weekend we would be going to the theater seeing a ton of these movies. I think I saw almost all of these movies either in the theaters or renting them. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about this one and I forgot about this one." And I was like, "Oh my God, this movie was awful. I forgot that exists." But like there were so many, it was so saturated, but there was so much stuff that never needs to be watched again. And there were so few that were actually really well done.
We'll have to tackle some of those, especially stuff like Cry Wolf and Hide and Seek, which I cannot remember at
I
all.
didn't remember hide and seek at all. And then I was like, oh yeah, remember that time Dakota Fanning and Robert De Niro? That was weird.
Oh my god, I've completely forgotten about that one too. So yes, everyone who's listening will have to delve more into the aughts, because obviously we completely forgot about a lot of those movies.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and now that I know who Jared Padalecki is, and he's done a ton of horror. One of my favorites being I don't care what anyone says. I like the Friday 13th remake. I like,
Yeah, it was pretty well done.
yeah. There's I don't know why there's so many people like this on the fence with Friday. I can see why you might be on the fence with Nightmare on Elm Street remake because I thought that was trash. But the Friday 13th remake I actually thought was good. Um, and I'd
I
like
mean, I guess for those diehard like Jason fans, like it's not necessarily the Jason they're used to, which okay, I can understand that, but it's still a great horror movie.
Yeah, and Jared Padalecki, even though he's actually a funny character in this movie because he makes that
He's
comment.
such a dick the entire thing, and I'm not used to it.
Oh, yeah, I didn't remember any of that until I was rewatching it, and I was like, oh my god, this is so much funny. This is so much funnier than I remember this movie being. I really enjoyed watching it this time. And Chad Michael Murray, I was like, oh my god.
Because
And
this
these
is
are
like
people I
Chad
didn't
Michael
know.
Murray is like a bad boy, which he also didn't do. They totally like swapped roles or something, and I was like, this is really bizarre.
It is bizarre, and I thought it made to feel much more. And this is 20 years going through, and me now knowing who all these actors are. I'm rewatching this and saying, "Holy shit, this movie is actually really good." Watching these actors in these different roles that I'm used to seeing them in.
Yeah, because they like totally go against their typecasting. And if you know the actor, it doesn't necessarily work because I was really tripped out and I kept expecting Jared Padalecki to be like, oh no, it's okay. But then he'd go and say or do something douchey, like trying to light something on fire. And I was like, the fuck are you? But he has one of my favorite lines where they've got they're the middle of the night where they're all sleeping and somebody's videotaping everybody. She's like, I hear somebody outside, and he goes, it's probably a serial killer or something. Go to bed. And then it is, and he steals the video camera.
Yes. Well, you know what? The only reason why I could think this I may have noted this because this is the only story aspect that I just did not get in the whole movie when I was watching it. I don't get why Vincent picks up the fucking videotape to begin with. That just seems weird to me. And the only way I could fathom explain that is the fact that at this time we started to see some rise in found footage films, and the director was just trying to make a comment on found footage films, so we see that footage in the movie for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't even know. Weird. There's the whole wall of like the camera, like the disposable camera printouts, and I was like, maybe he ran out of film. I mean, well, I was sitting there like, logically, how do they get things to and from this town if it's so isolated that the cops and like the police the fire department didn't know this town still existed after 10 years? They only knew because there was a fire, and then they make the comment of, there wasn't two brothers, there were three. And it was like, oh, well, now it makes sense. Somebody's making deliveries besides all that roadkill.
That's the third brothers out there and getting everything they need into the town, especially the materials to keep doing wax.
Well, and it was funny because he made a throwaway line earlier in the movie where she was like, how do you get used to the smell? And he goes, you can get used to anything if you're around it long enough. And then looking back, I was like, that's really gross. Like, he's just used to them doing that. And he's just like, okay, whatever, bye.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I saw that, and it's kind of like the reason why I saw there was so much torture in the movie when you're watching it is because the torture porn industry films were coming into play too, and so the director, who I can't remember his name,
it's the guy who did
Jaime Collet.
It's his, yeah, it was his first film. He went and did Orphan, The Shallows, Black Adam, Jungle Cruise 1 and 2 apparently, and he's about to release The Woman in the Yard.
Yeah, so I knew of his name. I didn't realize that was his first film.
Yeah,
but being Orphan was one of my favorite films of his, and I knew he did Unknown with Liam Neeson. Because I think he did a couple of films with Liam. Yeah, Commuter. Yeah. I think he did a couple of films with Liam Neeson. Like him and Liam Neeson were doing a few films. And so I kind of saw that there was a lot of action sequences that were well choreographed in this film, especially the first time when Cuthbert ends up locking herself in a vehicle when she gets smart to what the other guy is doing. I was like, oh, you wouldn't see this in a normal horror film.
Yeah, there's a lot of smart bits in it that really stood out. Like there's a lot of like, okay, obviously there's going to be a jump scare and you're not quite ready for whatever it may or may not be. But then there's the times where you're like, oh no, this is just really stupid. And there's the huge scare cord. And then there's the times where it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And it happens. And it makes so much sense because the two brothers, I believe, who wrote this did The Conjuring 1 through 3.
Oh.
Which is also still has that whole thing of you've got that scary presence and you are waiting for something and it still subverts your expectations and scares the shit out of you.
Oh. Okay.
So I thought that worked really well. With some of their stuff. You could tell it was some of their earlier writing because it was very 2000s cliche. And then with The Conjuring, like it's really good scripts. I mean, it's not like cringy 2000s whatever. It's a little more like period piece, but it's really well written.
Yeah, well, the writers also have the luck of having two great actors performing the two main characters. And James Wan is pretty goddamn good as a director, I hate to say.
Yeah.
I don't hate to say, I love to say that because I actually...
He is great.
I enjoy most of his work except for the Aquaman film.
Yeah, no, we don't talk about that.
I'm okay with saying that out loud. For most of everything he's done, and now after our discussion about *Malignant*, I think he's a brilliant director, except for the Aquaman films. I want people to watch *Malignant*. I keep reading stuff that people hate that movie. I'm like, dude, you just need to rewatch it. I know how you feel because I felt that way too. You need to just really, really delve deep in that one. So
we almost need to have a conversation about like the most controversial horror movies that people hate and you love and why you love them or why you hate them. Because like Skinamarink, people lost their minds and I thought it was absolute trash.
Oh no, that movie is fucking trash. That's on our list. That's on the list though.
I won't watch it again.
See, I need to rewatch it again. Like this one, I need to rewatch it again to think about it in a more critical way. When I originally watched it, it was more or less under the hype that I had wished I had seen it at the theater because I had heard about it and read about the hype.
Mhm.
But when I watched it, I was like, "What the fuck is this hype about?"
Yeah, I know.
Long to get through.
I've seen a couple of like passion posts on Reddit about people comparing it to like growing up with like parental abuse in one way, shape, or form. And I was like, some of this is reaching and inferring just a little too hard. Because some of this is like very Lovecraftian and just like bizarro, like all of a sudden you have no mouth. And I get that there's like aspects of that and like everything, but I felt like it was a little bit of a reach. And the fact that I had to do a deep dive to figure out that that's what people were talking about, I was like, if you don't see it in the movie, then it probably doesn't really mean that.
It's a David Lynchian film. God bless his soul, because he just passed.
Yes.
And I really did, I loved. He was probably one of him and Terry Gilliam. I thought about this when I heard the news that he passed away. Him and Terry Gilliam are the only two directors I could think of who can do some of the weirdest shit known to mankind, put it to film, and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's another director out there that has done the weird shit that they've done that I've enjoyed. Skinamarink is one of those films where it felt like he was trying to do something like a David Lynch, but David Lynch is like an auteur when it comes to weaving that weird shit to an actual story. And I don't think that was in Skinamarink at all.
No.
I think God House of Wax didn't go that way, but
no.
That's how Wax Mask may be, because I can't stand that movie, and I probably put that on the list just so I can get someone to talk to me about that movie. That was god awful. But we could talk about Skinamarink again later. I do think we should definitely do a show on that one, because those are the type of movies that people out there listening to the podcast probably want to hear us talking about, because they probably say, we hate this movie. Why are you doing an episode on it? House of Wax is one of those movies from the 2000s, and I guarantee you tons of people have forgotten even existed.
Oh, it's great. I have 3 of the top reviews for the movie that I think are hysterical.
Yes.
So I didn't write who said each one, but they were my 3 favorites. It bears little resemblance to 1953, formulaic but better than average teen slasher. Okay, that works. It makes sense. Back then it didn't, but okay. Not a good movie, but an efficient one, and will deliver most of what anyone could reasonably expect, assuming it would be unreasonable to expect very much. And then this one I absolutely adore, because after a month, no one will talk about this movie again. Is it fun? Yes. Lots, definitely.
Wow.
And here we are, 20 years later, still talking about it.
Well, we had forgotten about it for 20 years.
Oh, no, trust me, we did not forget about it. We just didn't talk about it.
And I hate to say that, that's about a lot of the Dark Castle films. And for me, with the exception of House on Haunted Hill, I don't recall having seen much of the other ones that often. I may have seen Gothika several times because I like Halle Berry. And she doesn't do. Now she does horror like every year. She'll do a freaking horror movie. She just released one last year. I still need to see that one, by the way. But back then you weren't thinking Halle Berry is going to be a horror movie, so you go see Gothika with Charles and freaking Robert Downey Jr. Like, what the hell kind of movie is this?
Well, and I like sitting through the opening credits. I didn't even remember like that opening credit from anything. I was like, who are these people and what have they done? And then I'm like, oh, I've actually seen like all of these movies. I just haven't remembered the opening thing at all.
Yeah. And I'll have to do a deep dive to see if Dark Castle even produces anything anymore. I don't know if they do, but it's not like they were before, back in the day when they were doing all kinds of movies. But this one being one of the I guess they are doing lots. They still do movies, because I didn't realize they did Orphan First Kill, so they're still doing it. Nope.
I figured they would have.
It's weird. When I go to their site, it's like part of. Weird.
Did they get bought out?
I could have been. I don't know. Supposedly they have a movie coming out called Last Breath, but Orphan First Kill was their last film. And I loved Orphan. And I almost did not like Orphan First Kill until I saw the twist. Until the twist came, I was like, "Oh, that makes this much more interesting now." that makes it
I
smell.
don't even remember what the twist was, and I watched it like 4 months ago.
The twist was when the family she's with is actually are just as bad as she is. It almost makes her the good guy in this film because the thing twists. Yeah, I was like, oh shit. Oh, see, this is why you don't remember anything they've done lately, is because they did Superfly, Suburbicon, which no one saw, and The Nice Guys, which I wish more people had seen.
Yeah, because I love The Nice Guys.
Oh, that's such a great movie. But getting back to House of House of Wax, I have to talk about the last sequence because I thought it was fucking brilliant, and I thought that the visuals on that one were way surpassed anything I was thinking of or remembering at all. Because and you said they used a lot of actual wax.
Yeah, they used like 20 tons of wax for the movie. And it's like that entire thing is like, it doesn't look like it should be real because I'm like, I know how wax is, but I cannot fathom that much wax.
Well, I do know that, if you're in a very cool, temperate climate, it will stay solid. I mean, it'll slowly melt, which is what they showed on the house. You can see it where it slowly melted
Yeah.
years. But yeah, I was like, oh shit, this is, and I don't remember any of this. So until I rewatched it, I was like, when it started burning and melting and how slow it started, and it got really, really fast. And then of course the wax that already melting is melting the other wax. And so it was like a visual. I don't even know what the best.
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like a bog or something because like yeah, you've got the whole like melting sequence of everybody like the fire shooting up through holes in the ground where it's melted through already. And then you've got the people slowly melting and then all the items start melting and you start seeing all the insides and it's disgusting. And then all of a sudden the entire floor just like turns into a swamp, like quicksand almost or something, and they just slip right through. And it's so the whole thing is really gross because you've got melting people left and right, and then they've got to like crawl out of a melting wall that's also really disgusting while the entire house is on fire. And it's like, one, you are going to have no hair on your arms anymore. I don't know how any of these people do. And that's just probably really fucking hot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't know if I noticed this when I originally saw the movie, but when uh Vince, I think it's Vincent. I think it's Vincent who cuts through or the door,
Yes,
and he
where it's
slices.
the wall.
Yeah, he slices the wax figure of the Siamese twins. I'm like, ah, shit. There's some visual shit in this, cutting them, severing them apart, and I was like, ah. See, I didn't think about any of this stuff when I originally saw this movie.
See, I don't think I did either. I remember at the beginning, all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, everybody's twins. And then the whole like twins thing kind of disappears for the siblings, except for whatever. I thought it was going to be more of a like, but we're twins too. You can be the good twin. And that is not what happened. But no, I really enjoyed that. And then when Vincent dies and falls, he literally lands on his brother the exact same way they were conjoined.
Yeah, and
And it's like from birth till death, you are together.
yeah, things I didn't notice when I originally watched it, but I noticed it now because I was paying more attention.
I know, right?
But yes, I mean, it that I could have not. I mean, that whole little coda at the end where it's the next day and the police have shown up and you see that the brother steals the camera because it may mean something and stuff like
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, let's go watch this later. It might have some memories on it. It's like, yeah, memories of people getting murdered.
exactly, because you don't realize that they've had Vincent had the camera, was filming all kinds of crazy shit.
I just want to know what happened to the dog, because the dog comes back in the tow truck and then disappears. Which good. I'm glad the dog disappears and we don't see anything with the dog. But
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
yeah,
How about that?
because they thought the dog was Wax and then it like attacks Jared Padalecki
Yeah.
and I laughed so hard because I couldn't remember if it was real or not.
I remember the dog part. But I was like, I didn't remember anything else. I really didn't, which is a shame. This is why I say I have to go back and start watching some of these Dark Castle films again. I don't mind watching them because at least I can be entertained. I remember 13 Ghosts remake being extremely entertaining. And I like I said, House on Haunted Hill was the only one I remember really loving. Um,
Well, and I think it's one of those things that I think we've talked about this before that when you're younger, and you watch a movie and you hate it, you definitely need to go back, because I know a lot of us do that whole thing of, oh, well, I've loved this movie forever, and then you go back and watch it and as an adult and you're like, oh, there are so many problems with this movie. I'm never watching it again. But there's quite a few movies like this where like you didn't like it the first time and then you watch it years later and you're like, actually, this was entertaining enough, or it had bits and pieces that were good enough that I remembered it after forgetting all these other movies I don't remember at all. So it's always worth a revisit, because unless the movie is like super hot trash and nobody ever wants to watch it again, or it's one of those you only watch once and you never watch it again, like Serbian film, it's worth revisiting certain kinds of movies.
How about Human Centipede? You want to revisit that one?
I've never watched that and I never plan on it, Kevin. It will not happen.
Oh my god.
That and Tusk. I will not watch Tusk.
I haven't watched Tusk either. It's on my list, and I keep putting it on there. It's the only Kevin Smith movie I've not seen. That and Yoga, and I
Yoga Hosers was
so more Clerks. I need more Clerks, but I hate to tell you, everyone who hasn't seen Clerks 3, one of the main characters dies. But it's a great ending to a trilogy, in my opinion.
I'm just excited that they get to finally re-release Dogma.
I was happy about that too. I was like, oh,
yeah,
Dogma's good. But getting back to House of Wax, is there anything else you would like to tell everyone about House?
So it takes place in Louisiana. It was filmed in Australia. So when we talked about the heat, it is unbelievable to think that that thing did not melt sooner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, especially out in Australia of all places. But it was actually in a like green space off of one of the main lots. And they actually had a lawsuit in 2006 after the movie, because apparently the SFX department basically burnt down a bunch of the studio. And the studio was saying they were grossly negligent because there was like no fire staff on duty. They had like open kindling and stuff everywhere, so there was no like actual fire safety. And they ended up getting like 7 million for this, which back then was a lot, because like this movie cost 40 million to make. I don't know if that was part of the 7 million, or 7 million was part of that or not, but it only made 70 million, most of which was VHS and DVD rentals.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, keep in mind that back then, they didn't spend nearly as much on marketing as you would.
No.
And the thing is, it was does it tell you what the actual gross at the theatrical gross was for the movie?
So box office was 70.1, gross opening weekend was 12, and US receipts were 32.
US was 32?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All I can remember is back then, I think Ghost Ship was the downward spiral for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to remember a lot more when I paid attention to Dark Castle, but then, like I said, Dark Castle kind of fell off and it didn't do as much. But then again, people like Robert Zemeckis and Joel Silver were getting busy with other shit. So
yeah.
But I was surprised. I would have thought that this made more back then.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I know that like now it was a different time for money, so maybe it was compared to back then, but that seems like little to nothing compared to what we're used to looking at.
Yeah, I would have thought it got at least 80 or 90.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Well, at $40 million, Dark Castle films were in the mid-range, which they stopped doing a long time ago. They don't do too many of those type of movies overall for big studios. Unless you're Jason Blum and then you do everything on the budget. Hey, I will not. I had to tell someone I will never knock what Jason Blum does, because he's someone who allows creative people to make low budget films with creative freedom, and then they do the back end deals with him so that they make more on the back end than they do on the front end. That's how his films stay on the low end. If he
I mean, and it's one of those things where like they still consistently put out like at least one really good horror film every year. With all of their other ones, that's what I'm saying, at least one.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when you're allowing a lot of first time filmmakers to do films, like I heard a lot of slack for the movie Night Swim when it came out, and I'm like, well, I didn't have a big problem with Night Swim. It's by a young director who
Hmm.
wrote and directed it, and he was allowed freedom to do a film that probably no studio would want to do. So I'm sure, and it didn't like completely bomb at the box office because it didn't
No,
cost much.
it didn't. And it had some good, attractive new actors that are rising up in popularity. And it was a decent horror film. My problem was the monster was hilarious. I laughed every time that guy's face hit the freaking screen.
You know what? I love the underwater photography and cinematography of that movie. I don't care what anyone says. I would watch it just for that. I don't. That's the one thing that if I was doing a movie about a fucking haunted pool,
Hmm.
the cinematography underwater better damn well be cool as shit.
Yeah, and it was.
But that being said, the main thing I want to say about this film is that having been 20 years in between seeing that originally and now, I am glad that I took the opportunity to revisit the film I had pretty much completely forgotten about until it was suggested by someone that we delve into this film. The thing is, I like to say about this podcast is we kind of delve into a lot of different films from a lot of different decades, and we hope that the audience out there actually seeks out these films if they've never seen them and or revisit them if they haven't seen them in a very long time. And this is one of those type of films that we believe is worth checking out again. And so I hope that after listening to us praise this film between the time we originally saw it to now, you have a better idea about how this film could fit into your rewatching schedule, and you should add it. With that, I'm Kevin Powers. This has been Conversations in Horror. Make sure to check out some of our previous episodes that are available on all major podcast apps. Also, they are available on YouTube, so you can find us anywhere, everywhere, and forever, because we have plenty of great episodes coming up for you in the year 2025 as we delve deeper and deeper into the bottomless pit of horror movies. With that, thank you so much, and everyone out there, have a good day until the next episode. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, written, produced, and directed by Kevin L. Powers, executive producer Kelly A. Inoka. All contents and material from this episode of Conversations in Horror is copyright 2025 Broken Lighthouse Pictures.